I still remember the day I first pulled into Pines, a freshly minted homeowner with a sense of excitement and pride thrumming through my veins. The first thing I did was carefully hang my American flag on a small mount by the front porch, something I had been looking forward to for years. But little did I know, that simple act of patriotism would ignite a feud with the most tenacious and power-hungry HOA president I'd ever encountered. Before we dive into this of a story, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had an HOA go way too far. Now, let's begin. My wife, Jennifer, and I had been married for 5 years. We'd both grown up in apartments, so owning a home was a massive milestone. We chose Pines for its tree-lined streets, kid-friendly parks, and safe reputation. Our house was modest but perfect for us: 3 bedrooms, a fenced backyard where we planned to adopt a rescue dog, and a cozy porch out front that I would look great with a small wooden bench. What truly sealed the deal was the prospect of living in a tight-knit, seemingly respectful community. Little did I know that the woman who ran the HOA, a stern-faced lady named Karen, would test every ounce of goodwill I had. Since I'm a military veteran, hanging the American flag was more than just a tradition. It was a symbol of pride, freedom, and a heartfelt reminder of my service. I had carefully chosen the spot where the sun would illuminate it in the morning, making the flag shine bright against our newly painted front door. That first morning, I stood on the lawn with a cup of coffee, admiring how the stars and stripes fluttered in the breeze. It felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. Karen noticed my flag the second day we lived there. I saw her standing on the sidewalk in her pressed khaki pants and a crisp blouse, arms folded as she stared straight at my porch. The next morning, a small envelope slid under my door, bearing the official Pines HOA letterhead. It read, "We have received complaints regarding an unapproved exterior decoration, American flag. Per community guidelines, all exterior displays must be approved by the HOA board. Please remove it within 3 days to avoid fines. Karen, HOA President." I felt a mix of confusion and anger. I'd read the HOA guidelines carefully before buying. There was a mention of decorative items, but nothing outright banned a flag. In fact, I was pretty sure state law, even federal guidelines, often protected the right to fly the American flag. So why was this a problem? I gently folded the note, placed it on the kitchen table, and showed it to Jennifer. She was as baffled as I was. She suggested we try reasoning with Karen. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. When I rang Karen's doorbell that afternoon, I was greeted by an immaculate flower bed framing her porch, each bloom carefully arranged by color. It exuded the same regimentation I saw in Karen's posture. She answered the door, eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Yes," she said, her tone clipped. I started politely. "Hi, I'm Mark. My wife and I just moved in on Maple Court. I received this note about the American flag I put up. I just wanted to clarify, there's nothing in the HOA rules that forbids flags, right?" Karen's lips tightened, forming a thin line. "The Pines guidelines clearly state that any exterior additions need pre-approval. Your flag is an exterior addition." She tapped the note as if it were a holy decree. "We have rules for a reason." I tried not to lose my temper. I understand the guidelines, but a flag is fairly standard, and I've seen other homes with garden flags and the like. I'm a veteran. It means a lot to me. I'd really appreciate if we could find a solution. Karen's expression didn't soften. If anything, it seemed to harden further, like she relished this confrontation. "Rules are rules," she said. "If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make an exception for everyone. Submit a request. Meanwhile, the flag must come down." I thanked her, forcing a polite smile, but my frustration simmered. Over the next day, I pored through the community guidelines again. Nowhere did it explicitly ban national flags or mention any special approval for them. In fact, in some states, laws protected homeowners' rights to display the American flag. Even HOAs had limits. This felt less like a rules issue and more like Karen exerting control. But I decided to follow protocol and submitted a formal approval request, referencing relevant laws. Little did I know that was only the first volley in a much larger war. Karen wasn't just interested in keeping the neighborhood orderly. She had a personal agenda that went far beyond a piece of cloth on my porch. And when I discovered the real reason she was dead set on removing my flag, everything turned upside down in the most shocking way. Days turned into a week with no response from Karen or the HOA board. My flag remained up, By the 8th day, a new envelope arrived, this time a violation notice stating I was in breach of community guidelines, carrying a $50 fine. Each subsequent week, the fine would increase by another $50. That quickly escalated to a staggering amount. I emailed the board, citing my legal right to display the flag, but heard nothing back. The only communication I got was more violation letters, each more threatening than the last. Jennifer tried to reassure me, saying we could handle a few fines while we sorted it out, but something about Karen's methodical approach, her silence, followed by official notices, set my nerves on edge. I spoke to a lawyer friend, Thomas, who suggested we gather evidence of any wrongdoing by the HOA. Document every letter, every interaction, he said. If it comes down to it, the law is on your side for flying the flag. The next incident was more sinister. On a Thursday evening, I returned home from the grocery store to find my flag torn from its mount and crumpled on the porch. I felt my heart twist at the sight. It wasn't just an attack on my property. It felt deeply personal, as though someone intended to disrespect the very symbol I cherished. I immediately checked the footage from the small security camera I'd installed above the garage. Sure enough, around noon, a figure walked right up the porch steps, yanked the flag off, and tossed it to the ground. The face was partially obscured by a hat, but the posture and silhouette had an unsettling resemblance to Karen. I brought the footage to Karen's door that same evening. She everything, of course, adopting a shocked expression as though I'd accused her of something outrageous. She claimed she was at a board meeting that afternoon and had multiple witnesses who could vouch for her presence. Yet her voice wavered just enough to make me suspect she was lying. "I'm sure it was a random act of vandalism," she said stiffly, "but it's proof that leaving your flag out is causing trouble." That line stuck with me. It's proof that leaving your flag out is causing trouble. It didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a warning. I was even more determined to find out what her true motives were. The next week, the fines doubled, and a scathing letter arrived accusing me of refusal to cooperate with HOA authorities. My neighbor, a kindly retiree who had lived in the neighborhood for a decade, caught me outside one day and pulled me aside. "Son," he said in a low voice, "you're not the first to butt heads with Karen. She's been HOA president for years, and anyone who challenges her ends up miserable." He told me stories of other residents who'd tried to stand up to her. They either moved away or caved to her relentless tactics. The board is afraid of her because she knows all the finances and secrets. She's threatened to raise dues if they don't comply, among other things. That piqued my interest. Karen controlled the finances. That gave her an extraordinary amount of leverage. It also suggested a potential avenue for corruption. If she was collecting fines left and right with minimal oversight, where did that money go? My lawyer friend Thomas suggested we file a formal request for the HOA's financial records. Most states require HOAs to be transparent with how they spend funds, especially those collected from homeowners. When we submitted the request, we got a frosty reply. "The board will review your request and respond within 30 days. I didn't have 30 days. The mounting fines were a real financial threat, yet I also sensed I was on the cusp of exposing something bigger than my flag dispute. Karen's hostility, the hush-hush approach of the board, and the stories from Mr. all pointed to a deeper wrongdoing. I decided to dig around on my own. Jennifer and I spent evenings combing through the Pines Community Forum archives, which were mostly dull meeting minutes and occasional event announcements. But one detail stood out. A few years back, the HOA had replaced the community pool fence at a cost that seemed exorbitant for the size of the project. The same contractor's name appeared in subsequent repairs, sometimes for things as minor as cleaning gutters on the clubhouse roof. The total sums were suspiciously high. Guess who oversaw those contracts? Karen. I shared this information with Thomas, who said it was worth investigating whether there was a pattern of inflated invoices. If Karen was funneling HOA money or getting kickbacks, that would be a serious crime. But we needed hard proof, contracts, bank statements, anything that showed the money trail. Problem was, only the board and specifically Karen had easy access to those records. At that point, I became convinced my flag was just an excuse for Karen to exert dominance and distract me from something else. She didn't care about aesthetics, she cared about power, and I was determined not to be her latest victim. Then came the day I caught her in a lie so big, it cracked the entire she'd built. A Saturday arrived where the HOA was hosting a community improvement meetup at the clubhouse. The idea was to gather residents for yard work, painting fences, cleaning common areas, and so on. Karen was scheduled to lead the event. I volunteered, hoping to get closer to the board members and glean more info about the HOA's finances. Jennifer joined too, wanting to show we were good neighbors despite the ongoing flag dispute. We showed up bright and early, but Karen was nowhere to be seen. We were told by another board member that she was unavailable at the last minute. Odd, I thought. She had been the one to plan this, so why the sudden absence? After a few hours of raking leaves, I slipped away to poke around the clubhouse office, just a quick look at the door to see if it was locked. Surprisingly, it was slightly ajar. Maybe one of the volunteers had used the restroom and neglected to shut it all the way. My heart pounded with a mix of curiosity and guilt. Thomas's words echoed in my mind, "We need hard proof." I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was a small office with a desk, filing cabinets, and a bunch of stacked boxes. One of the boxes had the label Financial Records 20XX 20XX. My heart hammered so loudly I feared someone outside might hear it. I lifted the box's lid. Folders upon folders of invoices, bank statements, and receipts greeted me like a treasure trove of possible evidence. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. I froze, unsure if I should hide or act casual. Voice called, "Karen, you in here?" It was Bill, another board member, from what I could tell. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath. Moments later, his footsteps retreated. I exhaled, my chest tight with adrenaline. Then swiftly I snapped a few photos of the top documents on my phone. Most were contractor invoices, but one especially thick folder caught my eye. The heading read, "Community Pool Renovation." I snapped more photos, trying to capture any suspicious line items or signatures. Then, hearing voices outside again, I gently replaced the lid and slipped out. That night, I pored over the images. One invoice for the pool fence replacement listed an amount nearly triple what a typical job should cost. Another invoice for miscellaneous repairs was vague yet exorbitant. All were signed off by Karen as approved. This wasn't just poor budgeting, it looked like outright fraud. The next morning, I found another violation letter in my mailbox, referencing the continuing display of an unapproved exterior decoration, along with a new fine of $300. This time, it included an ultimatum. If I didn't remove my flag within 48 hours, the HOA would initiate legal proceedings. It felt like a slap in the face. In response, I prepared a letter of my own, complete with several incriminating invoice screenshots, addressed to Karen and to every board member. My letter concluded, "If you move forward with legal action over my lawful display of the American flag, I will have no choice but to share these financial documents with the entire neighborhood and relevant authorities." Less than a day later, Karen herself showed up at my door. She looked unnervingly calm, her mouth curved in what could almost pass for a polite smile if you didn't look at her eyes. "Mark, let's not blow this out of proportion," she began. "I'm sure we can come to an amicable solution." She went on to propose a deal. She'd waive all my fines if I quietly took down my flag for the sake of community harmony. She hinted that the board was already planning to make an exception for veterans eventually. She acted like she was doing me a favor, but her eyes darted around, betraying anxiety. I told her I'd think about it, but inside I was seething. The more I saw her scramble, the more I realized she was scared of what I might expose. I called a quick meeting with my lawyer friend Thomas, and we decided to approach a local investigative reporter. Her name was, and she had a reputation for uncovering local government corruption. I shared the documents and explained the situation. My feud with Karen over the flag was just the tip of the iceberg. Eyes lit up when she saw the inflated invoices. "This could be a major story," she said, promising to follow up with her own research. Days passed in tense silence. The neighborhood felt different, a hush had fallen as if everyone sensed an undercurrent of conflict. Karen avoided me. The violation letters stopped abruptly, though the old fines still stood, then called me, her excitement crackling through the phone. "I've cross-referenced the contractor's LLC with public records," she said. "It's a shell company run by Karen's nephew. They've been overcharging for years, and the money's being siphoned into a private account. We can bust this wide open." I felt a surge of both triumph and anxiety. This was bigger than a local dispute. It was borderline embezzlement. We agreed that would confront Karen for comment, giving her a chance to explain before publishing the day emailed her. Karen called me in a fury. "How dare you slander me?" she screeched. "You'll regret this." She threatened defamation lawsuits, insisted the files were fabricated, and said that I would be the one going to jail for stealing HOA documents. At no point did she deny the specifics, which spoke volumes. A week later, this article went live. HOA president faces allegations of financial misconduct. Flag dispute uncovers deep corruption. The piece included quotes from me, references to the documents, and details of the suspicious invoices. Karen was the main focus, but the rest of the board didn't come off well either. The article suggested some members might have turned a blind eye. The reaction was explosive. Neighbors who had been indifferent suddenly. People began placing American flags on their porches in solidarity. Some left notes on my door thanking me for exposing the scheme. Karen tried to hold an emergency HOA meeting to do damage control. But this time, the community flooded the clubhouse in protest. Residents demanded an audit, demanded Karen's resignation. She attempted to hush them, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But with public scrutiny and the local paper covering the story, her threats lost their sting. Even the board members who had previously supported her jumped ship. In the days that followed, a formal investigation by local authorities began. Karen was placed under scrutiny for possible fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds. She resigned in disgrace, though she didn't go quietly. Rumor had it she spent her last days packing up her belongings and listing her house for sale. She was gone by the end of the month, replaced by a new, more transparent HOA board that vowed to correct every unfair fine and restore trust in Pines. As for my flag, it flew proudly without contest. No one dared issue another violation notice. In fact, the newly elected HOA president came by personally to apologize, promising that veterans in our neighborhood would never again face such harassment. The fines I'd accrued were rescinded. And best of all, the entire fiasco had the unexpected silver lining of bringing our neighbors closer together. People started greeting each other more, discussing community improvements in a friendly manner instead of under the shadow of Karen's authoritarian rule. That, my friends, is the wild story of how a single American flag exposed a mountain of HOA corruption. If you enjoyed this saga of neighborhood intrigue and you want more jaw-dropping tales, hit that subscribe button now, click the like button to show your support, and share your own HOA horror stories in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest stand can shine a light on the biggest lies.